Hey everybody, Kyle Goth here from GoatFilmReviews.com and the Goat Film Reviews YouTube channel, and I've got my quick reaction to the new film Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. This is the sequel to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which is I believe, 2018. So it's been 5 years since we've gotten ourselves the next installment in this series. It is a second in a planned trilogy now, and I will warn you people ahead of time, it does have that second chapter cliffhanger that we've seen a lot more recently in films. Things like Dune, things like Fast X, where they know they're making another one, so they've left us on a cliffhanger. And I'm okay with that in some extents. If it feels like the first half has closure, has enough closure. Most something I criticized about Dune. I know a lot of people say that it does tell a complete story, and yes, it does, but it's not a fulfilling story without the second half. In the case of Fast X, I think it's a movie where they haven't even started production on the next installment, and the cliffhanger ending of that film didn't provide any closure whatsoever. In the case of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I will say this, it provides more closure than Fast X, perhaps a little bit more than Dune, but not as much closure as I would have hoped for. So I'm just going to start off with that right now. It's a negative, but I will say overall I am positive on the movie, quite positive actually. I don't know if I like it more than the original film or less. It's right around that same level. I'll start with the positives though, and that is this. I've heard this kind of bandied about because people are calling it like one of the greatest animated films of all time, one of the greatest comic book films of all time, one of the greatest movies of all time. I've had people that have said this is their new favorite movie ever. I'm not going to go that far, but I will say I think the animation in this film is the most impressive animation I've ever seen put to celluloid. And I think that should be noted. I think this might be the most impressively animated film I've ever seen. I had regular moments where I was oohing and ahhing, and I was into it, and I was excited to see where it was going to go, and part of that was the impressive animation of the film. Another thing I kind of like, another thing I really like about the movie is how it kind of functions almost like the movie Cabin in the Woods for the Spider-Man world, in that we've had Spider-Man rebooted so many times that you almost feel like it's meaningless because they're just going to reboot it again. Like we never really have traction with the character. This film kind of goes the extra mile to give traction to not just this version of Spider-Man, but every version of Spider-Man, which is a theme they've kind of been going on for the last couple of live-action films as well. Not only that, I do think the way this film builds off of mysteries and unexplained events, as well as just overall mythology of the previous film, it makes that film so important to what this story is, which I really like about sequels, because sometimes sequels can be, hey, we're just going to redo the same plot again, we're just going to, make the villain bigger and badder, we're just going to make the set pieces bigger and more extravagant, but sometimes they forget, like telling a great sequel, I think, does have to build somewhat off the original. Except in cases like James Bond, where you don't exactly need it. But I even think my favorite James Bond films are the ones that have some connective tissue that build off of what we've come before. And I think that works really well here. And the film has a lot of setup for what the third film will be as well. And we won't really know if this movie is higher on my list or lower until I see how a lot of the setups pay off. And I think that's what's kind of part of it, is like, for example, with a film like Infinity War, I knew exactly how I felt about that film upon first seeing it. That film had enough closure to the story, sad closure, but it had enough closure to the story where if they just didn't make Endgame, I'd been frustrated, but I would have had the same amount of appreciation for what Infinity War was. Let's say they canceled Beyond the Spider-Verse for some reason. This movie would be hard to watch given where it leads off. It leaves us with more questions than I think it needs to. I'm back to the cliffhanger thing again. I love the way the film begins. It begins with some time with Spider-Gwen. It gives us a lot more character development in terms of our secondary, tertiary Spider-Man characters, and there's a lot of them in this film. I like the way they introduce the Spot, who's kind of a comedic villain, but actually has a lot more going on in the narrative than what we expected. Becomes a lot more of a, like the way they develop the Spot as a comedic villain at the beginning of the film, and the way that character evolves for the rest of the film is incredible. All that stuff being said, I think that when I'm hearing these things about like the way the story is so unique and different, and I don't really know that I feel that, I think it's kind of by the numbers second chapter in a trilogy. It has moments of like true greatness in that, But I think it's more of the presentation of these elements that wowed me more than the story of the elements. And again, a lot of it has to do with how those story elements came to a close. Maybe if there are setups I'm not seeing that are important to that second half of the story, could change everything. But as it is right now, I felt the story was a little bare bones. I felt like I knew where it was going most of the time. And that's fine. We have a lot of films that come out where you kind of know A, B, C, and D, and you still have fun and enjoy it. That's the case here. I'm giving this film right now, and it could change, but I'm giving this film 4 out of 5 right now. I really, really liked this movie. There's just a few things that kind of took me out of it. And again, that could go up or down given how this film connects with what's set up. I think you almost have to look at these movies. If you have a to be continued on your film, it does permanently tie it to the next film. The plan is that story is to be concluded. I think Back to the Future Part 2 can only be viewed in the lens of how it connects to Back to the Future Part 3. You can see a number of merits on its own, but if the film is set up as the first half of a full story, you have to judge it based on that as well. Because that's the intention. I always tell people all the time, I judge films based on their intention. If you're making a horror film, I want to be thrilled by the horror. Or having fun with the goofiness of the horror. If you're making a comedy, I do want your intention to make me laugh. Your intention should be that. If you're making a romance film, I want to be swooned. I want to be taken away with the love and affection, or in some romance films, the heat. But that's the thing about it, is that the intention is there, and I think that applies to the first half of a two-parter. I think, Fellowship of the Rings and Two Towers and Return of the King can be judged on their own merits, but if one of those movies really sucked, I think it would impact your ability to enjoy it. I know a number of people who didn't like The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, and they were ones who enjoyed Unexpected Journey and Desolation of Smaug, but they just didn't like that third film. It hampered their ability to watch that whole trilogy. That can happen. So I think because of the plan in place, we won't know the full story of Across the Spider-Verse until Beyond the Spider-Verse, but given what I saw right now, it is a very promising beginning of a two-parter. Currently sitting in my top 10 films of the year. We'll see if it stays that way through the end, although this year is just getting started. I know it's June, but we still have a lot to go. So I'm having a lot of blockbusters that have been really surprising me, and then a few that have really dowered me. But Spider-Verse, thankfully, is not one of the disappointments. It is a very, very solid film. Check it out in a couple of days, because they're putting out a new version of the film. I did have issues with the sound mixing when I went, but they are fixing that for a re-release, I think on the second or third weekend here. So give it a couple of days after seeing this, and then go check out Across the Spider-Verse. And when you're done with that, come on back to this channel and let me know your thoughts on it down below. Let me know what your favorite Spider-Man film is. I didn't realize we had 10 Spider-Man films, and that's not even connecting like spider character films, like Venom or Morbius. We have a lot of Spider-Man films, so tell me your favorite one. I'd love to hear it down in the comment section. While you're down there, please make sure to like and subscribe. There are 2 free things you can do that help support the channel immensely, and then make sure you never miss new episodes of the show as they drop. You can also find goatfilmreviews.com for my many written reviews. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Almighty Goatman, and you can check out my show Kyle and Nick on Film that I co-host with Nick Plotachuk from the St. Paul Filmcast. All those links are down in the description, and we'll see you next time.